Hello Gobs, welcome back to another video. Today I have a different type of content I'm going to be calling Gob Rants. Now, if you can't tell by the title, I'm going to pick a topic, usually TTRPG related. Tabletop role-playing games is what I know the most, and I'm going to pick a theme or something from them. Maybe like I might have homebrew as one of the topics, min-maxing, and power building, and other stuff, whatever. Today's first Gob Rant ever is going to be about realism and the tabletop setting. Now, I've recorded this once before, and now I'm recording it again, but you guys don't really care. Just know I've been tumbling around this in my idea, trying to make it make sense to somebody that isn't me, and I've given up. So I'm just gonna start ranting, and if it makes sense, then you guys can agree with me in the comments below, and if it doesn't, then you guys can call me stupid in the comments below. I don't really care, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Now, I've been trying to define what realism in TTRPGs means to me while trying to tell you guys what it means to me. And the closest I got is using real-world logic, such as physics, chemistry, biology, and other sciences, and taking that real-world logic and putting it into a tabletop RPG without any abstraction. Just nothing, not caring about what the rules would say, or anything like that, just slipping it right in there regardless of what's happening in the current scene. That's it. That's all realism is to me. I think it will start to make more sense the later I go on and explain it. But for now, just think real world physics in a fictional setting. So non-fictional mechanics or whatnot into a fictional setting. Now, I'm going to say some good stuff about it. So the first thing is, I think it enhances creativity. There's a thing whenever you're presented with a situation as you're playing a tabletop game and it runs through your head, it's what would I do? And then you kind of start there. So in a way, it's kind of realistic on what would I do. You kind of push it onto your character and it's like, okay, that's what I would do. Now, what would my character do using that information? It's not even realism. It would just be logic. You're just thinking logically of what you would do. But there is a difference between realism and using logic. So I would think logic is logically, I can't carry 8 great swords on my back. Realistically, I can comfortably carry one, but you could also, you could find a way to carry 8 great swords on your back realistic. But logically, it makes sense just to carry 1 or 2 or somewhere along those lines, whatever. That's kind of what I think of when I mean realism versus logic. It's just logically thinking. Like logically, you can't jump to the moon. Realistically, you can't jump to the moon. But logically, in a fantasy setting, you could build a rocket or something, or some type of teleportation magic to carry you to the moon. Is that realistic? No, it's probably not going to be realistic, but it's logical if that's what works in that setting. And realism is such a broad category too, because there's some RPGs I'll say are more realistic, but then they don't hone in on the realism part, so parts of it are realistic. For example, Call of Cthulhu and Traveler tend to have more realistic ways of recovering from HP, as it takes, I think in Call of Cthulhu is 1 HP for first aid and 1d3 for medicine out of 12 health. So I think you can get hospital help, but it takes 1 week, so it could take around 3 to 4 weeks, a month or so in Call of Cthulhu to recover from HP, if I remember the rules correctly. But compared to 5e, you just need a nap. You can be knocking at death's door, 2 death saving throws down, you've been brought back 3 times that day from 0 HP, and you just take a 6 to 8 hour nap and you're fully recovered. So I think that goes to show that even in these realistic settings in quotation marks, there's still not some realism to them. Because, I'm not going to get to that yet. I'll get more on that later, so I'm just going to go through and talk. I was talking about how it enhances creativity, and for this video, I will be using examples from my group. I love these guys' pieces, but the stuff they say really drives me up the wall sometimes. It's like half and half. 2 of them, they're just mumbo jumbos, ordinary people like me, and then the other 2 are like mechanics, gun nuts, and they know a bit about everything. so it can be kind of they're the ones that always go realistically. More on that later, but just know this is my group. I love my group. They're awesome people. I'm just poking a little bit of fun, ranting a little bit, but anything that you will hear we've talked about or are going to talk about, so don't worry about that. The other half is, if you do enjoy realism in your games and you tend to play more realistically, there's nothing wrong with that. When you're DMing and you've gone over it with your group, you guys can do it whatever way you want. So if you want more realistic and a fantasy settings, then you're more than welcome to. This is just opinionated, and you'll see why later on why I don't enjoy realism. I'm going to read a Reddit question that I put up a while ago about realism and TTRPGs, and I'll be reading that later, and that it explains very much so better than what I could. The commenters on there explain it very well. So I think I can move on to the first example of using real world logic in the game. So some type of realism in the game without having it actually be realistic. Here, let me explain. In the 5e campaign I'm currently playing, my friend, one of the mechanic gun nuts, he grew up on a cattle farm, so he knows how cattle behave. And he also worked with cattle. He knows how cows work. And in this 5e campaign, I'm playing a cavalier who wants to find various monsters and animals to tame and ride into battle. We were at a village, and in this herd, or in the ranch, where the horses or other animals are generally kept, sat a white rhino. And my character's like, I've never seen a white rhino, let alone a rhino before. I want to go tame it so I can ride it into battle later. So obviously, I don't think most people are zoologists or know how rhinos work anyways. So he used his real life knowledge of how cows work and implemented onto the rhino. And it made a really intriguing roleplay scene. My character had to try to tame this rhino. And it was probably one of the best scenes I've ever sat through or got to be a part of. Obviously, the rhino isn't going to act like a cow in real life. But he did use how realistically a cow would work to enhance how to tame a rhino. That's a good case of realism working. Now, later on, this might sound contradictory, but that's just like the only thing that's ever been good about realism in a thing I've ever played. Let's just start on the rant part. There's about one or two things that make me angry and make me hate the word realistically in TTRPGs, regardless of the system, regardless of how realistic said system is. I was gonna go through and explain all these realistic systems, but you don't need to know. The first thing I hate is that it seems overly tedious. I think anytime I've ever heard realistically, and then they would go on to explain it, has been needless, it's interruptive, and here's a couple examples. For example, we were playing Morkboard, and in the module, I think from the back of the book, or I think it's online, somewhere, there's a room full of just bricks, and then in the center is like a pond of muck or whatever, some type of black liquid. And in the middle of that, there's a column with two skeletons on it. And the DM had specifically stated that you cannot hit these skeletons regardless of what you do. Called it a bit of pruny, but you know, they're just there for looks. They don't actually affect the dungeon at all. It was just to add a bit of something to the scene so it wasn't just an empty room. But regardless, my friend started questioning. He wanted to know how high the column was and how far away the column was. Again, Morkboard, they don't really care about how far away you are from something. So it was kind of like he was realistically trying to gauge how high up these skeletons were, and it was just needless. You can't hit them, you can't interact with them, so why even bother asking? There was no point. But that was just a minor thing. Another thing is playing in Cyberpunk. This was me running it, but I had him sabotage a car, and he went through and he realistically explained how he would sabotage his car. Now, I'm happy that he knows so much about cars, and I'm happy that he went into character, or not even character, but he went in depth about it. It wasn't his character. I don't think his character was even an engineer or anything. I think it was just a medtech. And he went through and he took like 5 minutes to explain how he would sabotage his car and how it would work. And the end goal was just sabotaging the car. It's like, you could circumvent 5 minutes of explaining to me how it would work, just to 10 seconds to say you sabotage a car, give me like a short description, and it just has to sound like some type of sabotage, and I'm like, okay, perfect, that works, and we move on. It's just that whole like, it's tedious and needless. Here's a more recent example. In Ryutama, I was running, there was a town called Everspring. This town is in a valley, it has a bunch of water running to it. The big thing is that a lot of the buildings in the town are built around water. And we have a blacksmith in the group. This was not the guy from the last two, but this is a different guy. And he's playing a blacksmith. So he wanted to see how a blacksmith shop is ran around here. So I thought it was a pretty cool idea just to have the blacksmith shop. You know, the usual furnace, forge, anvil, all of that. And then he had the side open and he would sit next to a stream where he would reach over and cool off his weapons. Like in movies and other games and stuff, they always put the weapon into water to cool it off. Then I heard those dreadful words. Realistically, cooling your weapons off in water after you smith them is actually really bad for the weapon and causes... they would go on to have this long conversation about how using water in blacksmithing is actually really bad for the weapons. And then they finish it off with, unless it works differently in this world. And then I was like, yep, it works differently. And that was it. It was so needless to sit there and explain to me the workings of how blacksmithing would actually work with water. And it's like, okay, we're in a fantasy setting. Who cares? It's just a blacksmith shop. Let's move on. You don't have to sit there and explain it to me. I could have nipped it in the bud earlier, but it's like, whatever. Let's just move on. And then another setting. This was session 2 of Ryutama, but another example was two of them were fighting a group of nobles, and the nobles didn't want to kill them, they just wanted to knock them out. So they were making non-lethal attacks. I had an archer at the back who had done a non-lethal attack, and he was like, realistically, you can't make a non-lethal attack with a bow. And here's probably another case of realism working, but my other realistically guy, he spoke up. He's like, well, actually, realistically, they make impact arrows that can knock people out. And then they kind of got into it. And it's like, again, whatever. It's in the rules that say I can make a non-lethal attack with whatever weapon, so it doesn't matter if it's realistic or not, because that's what the rules say. So call me a bit of a prude for playing by the rules, but the rules say I can make a non-lethal attack with the bow. I can make a non-lethal attack with the bow. Of course, there's tons of other settings. For example, in Call of Cthulhu, we had put a wine bottle in a wine rack that opened up a door. The door shut, and realistically, one of them asked, they wanted to know how the locking mechanism worked on the door. Like, was it a pulley system? Was it gears or something inside the wall? And it's like, what does it matter? What's your end goal? Do you want to sabotage the lock? Just say you want to sabotage the lock, because I'm not an engineer. I can't explain how the lock works. I can give like a crude example, but then it's not going to be realistic enough for you to be satisfied with. So why even bother asking me how it works? Again, a lot of this stuff is just like talking outside the game. I mean, we've done that a bit before, but they're getting better. These have been like over the course of like 3 or so years with one of them. The other one has joined recently, like maybe less than a year, maybe a year, somewhere around there. But it's just something I've seen often. And it's not only our group, I've also seen horror stories about people wanting to play realistically. And I think it's just, a lot of it's just tedious. Like, imagine if it was realistic healing and you broke your arm in the game, you would have to spend months. You have to spend months recovering. In Call of Cthulhu, if you lose a limb, I think in the book it's recommended that you just retire the character, and that's realistic, but you know, breaking an arm shouldn't, I don't want to have to wait like 3 months in game. It's like, let's just speed up the healing process and move on. I don't think anybody would like these very tedious, I think a truly realistic system would be downright awful. Imagine having to track the durability, having to explain how you realistically fight, which is a thing they do. They explain like, oh, you can't realistically swing a sword that way, or realistically armor wouldn't work that way, and it's like, whatever, it's fantasy. That's probably the worst part, is that a lot of this comes from playing 5e. And it's like they're taking realism and shoving it into one of the most unrealistic systems. Again, you could be at death's door, 0 HP, death is coming to get you, you're full of arrows, full of cuts and whatnot, and then you just take a 6-hour sleep and you're fine. You just bounce back. You're throwing fireballs, you're fighting dragons, eldritch beings beyond your comprehension, and you're worried about how you realistically swing a sword? See, I think you guys are starting to get a clear idea of what's happening. But the most heinous thing about this all is when they try to use it to bypass the rules. They do something, or they're trying to explain some way to get realistically how they would do it to bypass certain sections. You know, it's fine usually, But when the story specifically set up, or the rules are specifically set up not to work like that. For example, in one of my dungeons, I had this flower that was being grazed by moonlight in a old abandoned church, but they kept a lock on it, or it was like a palisade gate, iron bars down, iron bars across, and they were asking me how the door was realistically built. So I explained it. I was like, it's a palisade door. You can't reach through it. You can't reach a tool through it. You could see between the cracks, but you can't grab the flower without finding the lever to open the door. And I explained that to them. It's like, there's a lever somewhere in the dungeon that you have to flip to activate the door. And they're like, well, can't I just roll a strength check to lift up the palisade? And it's like, no, because it's locked underneath. Your character goes up to move the door and it doesn't budge. Figure that you can't lift this gate up. And I explained that to them. It's not like I said, no, you can't. I explained to them how it wouldn't work. And then it was like, oh, realistically, I should be able to just lift it up or get a chance to. And it's like, I told you, it's locked underneath. Your character goes to lift it and it feels like there's something underneath preventing your character from lifting it up regardless of your strength. That was just one example. Here's another example. This was probably one of the worst ones ever. We were playing Pathfinder. They were in the sewers and they had just finished the mission, and I decided to throw in a bit extra. There was like a corpse hanging onto a chest at the end of one of the sewer hallways, and it was 5 feet of stone, 5 feet of sewage, 5 feet of stone. That's how wide the hallway was. 15 feet across, 5 feet of sewage in the middle, and the chest was at the end. So at the end, there was like a 5 feet section of walkway. So kind of just curves around, and then past the 5 feet is where it starts the 5 feet of brick, 5 feet of sewage, 5 feet of brick. The chest was on that very corner. They were fighting a giant maggot that had fallen from the chest and taken the space in front of the chest. And then I had a player, one of my other players, not one of the realistically ones, but they went up to fight the maggot. The realistically player was playing a kobold with a spear. And spears don't have reach, guys. Remember, spears don't have reach. And in Pathfinder, you get 3 actions. And he wanted to spend all 3 actions attacking. He asked me if he could attack through the legs of the player in front of him to hit the maggot. And it's like, oh, mind you, the maggot's grabbing on to the character's leg. It's so occupied. It was a grapple, so it so occupies the space in front of him. But he wanted to grab on to the leg of the character. And I told him, no, you're going to have to move around and make your attacks on the other side. Or, climb through the sewage and make 2 attacks rather than 3 attacks. And that's when he said those dreaded words. Realistically, I should be able to attack between the legs. And it's like, why? And it's like, my character is small and he's holding a spear. And it's like, nowhere in the rules does it say small characters can move through another creature's space. You can move through an ally space, but you can't end your movement in the ally space. So you have to be able to move through them and end on the square occupied. But like I said, that entire little hallway was filled up. There was enough room to attack from the side. I should mention that, but there was enough room. I should say the maggot and the chest were in the same space, but the right side of the maggot was open. He just had to spend an action moving and make 2 attacks, but he sat there and tried to argue that he could attack through the character's leg. Nowhere does it say you can ever make an attack past another ally, unless it's ranged, but even then it would be like cover or whatever, because he's, partially blocking. Realistically, the automaton was standing in the way, grappling with this maggot, so he was flailing about, so there was no legs to attack through. But even then, the rules say you can't, so it's like, don't just move and attack. Why are you trying to spin here? I don't care if it even if it was realistic. The rules, it's like a board game. You follow the rules. You have to move around and attack. Now, it might have been a bit forgiving if the tone. I think tone plays a big part. Whenever I'm explaining something or something like that and you go, well, realistically, I'm very inclined not to listen. I just don't care what you have to say after that point. If I ask for input on how something realistically would work, that's fine. Anytime I've asked for something realistically how it works, I've never had a problem. It's only when it's unprompted. It's like, bro, we're playing a fantasy setting. We're playing in a fictional world. Who cares how realistically it would work? And I'm a bit raw. I like rules as written, so I don't care if you could sheath a sword in 3 seconds. It's still gonna be an action to swap between weapons. That's just the rules of the game. Talk with me after the session about it. I might be listening, but don't stop in the middle to go, realistically, I could put my sword away and get my spear out in 4 seconds. So if that's even true, buddy, you're playing in a game where Tabaxi, a cat folk, can wear full plate armor, wielding a great sword and a bag full of stuff, and can still move like 600 feet in 6 seconds. Again, that's the biggest thing. Trying to take realism and put them into a setting that's completely unrealistic. The Reddit, I got that from the Reddit comments. They explained it perfectly. Can you guys see where I'm coming from now? Can you guys not like preemptively judge me? Now you can judge me. Now you can call me stupid. But we're gonna go read that Reddit post now. Thank you for all the lovely people who commented on this Reddit post. And I should follow up. Remember, if you enjoy realism and it's very fun for you, I can kind of see realism as in that's how you imagine things in your head, how realistically they're fighting. But don't interrupt play to explain something realistically. Like, keep it to yourself. I like arrow tracking, which is realistic. A quiver, you know, you're gonna spend ammunition shooting your bow, but most people bypass it. And even I would even let my players bypass it now. I've completely switched stances on it. I used to be hardcore, like, no, you have to track your ammo, so you have to buy arrows when you're in the shop. But now it's like, whatever, I don't care. Baldur's Gate 3 has really changed me. Anyways, it's realistic to track ammunition, and I just do it silently to myself. I'm not gonna be like, realistically, my quiver should be holding 40 arrows and not 20. Have you ever shot a bow in real life? I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna keep it to myself and track on my sheet and just say, hey, I'm gonna buy arrows while we're in this town. I might buy 2 quivers. So if you're going to have realism, keep it to yourself. Don't be like, realistically, that's not how you would swing a sword. That's not how this armor would work. That's not how this engine would work. Keep it to yourself unless someone asks and they're interested. But again, if you're into realism, comment down below. That's the ultimate idea of this video, is I want to see what other people think about realism in tabletop role-playing games. So if you enjoy it or if you dislike it, tell me in the comments below, and I might make a follow-up video reading those comments. So now let me go pull up the Reddit post to see what smarter people have to say about this. Look at this, I can read this like it's a TTRPG horror story like I read all the time. Our story comes from GoblinKingYT. Too much realism, help. This was posted 7 months ago. Table disputes. Not sure if this is the place to post this, but I'll try anything. Also sorry for formatting, I don't make posts often. Been playing with a group for some time, and one of our players, now it's 2 of our players from time to time, tried to apply real-world logic to fantasy situation. For example, some common quotes are, realistically, I could do X thing in real life. That's not how X armor or X weapon would actually work. Or how exactly does X complex machine work? Or how is X engine or some sorts broken? I'm not a mechanic or engineer or sorts, so I don't know. I was wondering if there was a way that DMs deal or other ways to explain these kinds of players, aside from the usual, it's a fantasy world, not a physics simulation, because they haven't got it to their head yet. I don't want to be rude and try to dismiss them as saying, I'm the DM, what I says goes. It sounds just a bit harsh. I'll still stand by that. If something's happening to your character and you don't like it, don't be an a-hole about this. Don't try to use it in an a-hole manner. But if something's happening to your character and you don't want it to happen, just because the DM doesn't mean you have to let it happen to your character. Just say, hey, I'm not cool with that, and if this keeps happening, I'm just gonna pull my character and, move on. Now, you can't always say that, but if you don't want something to happen to your character, you should also be able to not let it happen to your character. Like I said, don't be an a-hole and be like, well, since I didn't get my discount on this item, I'm gonna pull my character, because just because you're the DM doesn't mean you get to say I don't get a discount. Just use it responsibly. Come on, I'm talking about your characters getting essayed, not whatever. I don't know. I'm just gonna read this. Our first comment comes from Wolfgang177. With a session 0, an explanation of the conduct and style of play allowed at my table. Allow some degree of it if it isn't distracting or irritating. Otherwise, if it occurs, I just stop things briefly, tell them that their idea is interesting, but ultimately not supported by the game's rules, so just won't work, and move on. Any complaints but actuallys are just shut down until after session. If it becomes constantly disrupted, I just remove the person from my game. After session / during breaks or what have you, if someone wants to talk about ruling, I'm more than welcome. But watermelons are berries, so I should be able to make them when casting good berry. They weigh X pounds, so dropping them from X height should deal X dx damage. That isn't how the spell works or is intended to. The answer is no, and the ruling's fine. Ideally, I meet with the players outside of session time, either either hanging out playing games or for a pseudo interview. If they seem like a bad fit for my game, I just tell them that in polite terms and move on. Haven 700 says, point them to the peasant railguns and explains that physics and mechanics don't always correlate. Also, how high most PCs can run, jump, and carry is ridiculous to the real world. When it comes to machines, they just don't work the same way in D&D. Why burn coal to power a steam engine when you could get a fire elemental to power it for free? Some cases let them F around and find out. Let them try to fix the machine. It has cracked gears, axles, fuel canisters, etc. Give me a metalworking tool check to see if you can fix it. My character doesn't have that. Then you won't know how to fix it. D16 Navacho says, I used to introduce new players to TTRPGs, which is Introductory Adventure to the Alternarity system. Early in the adventure, the heroes encounter a badly injured man. Twice I run this adventure for medically trained players, and they started asking me questions about his pupil dilation and pulse and other things. I've got no idea what a man stabbed with an icicle's vitals should be, so I paused the game and told him out of game, basically, that this is a game. Lots of things are abstracted. Roll for first aid to see how they go. Not that things like pulse and pupil dilation should be wasted. Makes for a great description when narrating how the character succeeds or fails at first aid. Your player should recognize that all games have levels of abstraction. Cavalry doesn't move in an odd bending formation like it does in chess. The free market doesn't revolve around hotels and railroad yards like it does in Monopoly, and so it is in TTRPGs. There's also the story factor. You wouldn't play a shoe store clerk and refuse our adventure because that misses the point of playing. For the same reason, you shouldn't play as some Isekai scientist who tries to kickstart technology. That also misses the point, unless it's explicitly the theme of the adventure. The last thing I will read comes from CS Engine Alt. Realistically, I could do X thing in real life. This goes one of two ways. If the things they do isn't covered by a written rule or the rule is vague, I'll err on the side of allowing it, unless it's ridiculous. If it's covered by a written rule, I will 99% of the time refer to the rule and expect them to follow it. The other 1% is when they suggest something so cool that I'm happy to break the rules. That's not how X armor or X weapon would actually work. Again, if it's explained that way in the rules, I'll just shrug and say, in D&D, that's how that works, and we're playing D&D. How exactly does this X complex machine work, or how's X engine of some sort broken? Roll me an investigation check, please. On a fail, you have no idea how this complex machine works or how it's broken. On a pass, you can't be 100% sure, but answer whatever the details the DM feels are important. You might be able to fix with X supplies and tools if that is your goal. See, again, just tell me your end goal. Don't force me, or not force me, but don't expect me to explain it. Just tell me what your end goal is and I can explain how you can achieve it, or you can just explain it in your own way. If they push back against the ruling, I try to be gentle first. I'm sorry you don't like my ruling, but my ruling is final. What would you like to do? If they keep pushing, look, you're entitled to your own opinion on how this should work. And if you DM a game for me in the future, I will abide by your rulings. However, I've made my ruling on this, and now I need you to abide by it. Otherwise, I open the game to people litigating me about every ruling I make and bogging the game down. If you feel you must debate this further after session, I'm happy to hear you out. But in the moment, right now, my ruling stands, barring litigating my ruling further. What would you like to do? Last resort, do you wish to continue playing D&D at this table? Because if so, I highly suggest you stop arguing with me and actually play the game. Last warning. Now, this doesn't only apply to realism. You can use this information or how to act as a DM in most situations. Again, like in the D&D or horror RPG settings, we're not professionals. I don't think any of these guys are licensed professionals. So, use any of this advice at your own risk. Always read your group beforehand, make sure everything's okay. And that concludes the video. Comment down below. Tell me what you think about realism in video games, or just call me stupid. I'm happy with either thing. So I hope you guys have a good lap of your day, and it's a fantasy game. I don't have to play realistic.